Her world didn't end with a bang, but with the soft chime of a text message on a phone that wasn't hers. Lying on the cold marble of their bathroom floor, hidden from the lavish party downstairs, Rosalind saw her entire life revealed as a lie. The name on the screen wasn't a colleague. The words weren't about business. They were a confirmation of a betrayal so deep it fractured her soul. He had not only stolen her heart, but her future, her dreams, and the very ideas she had built her quiet life upon. Little did he know, the quiet life was the real lie, and the woman he was about to discard was more powerful than he could ever imagine. This is the story of how a shattered wife disappeared, only to return as the billionaire titan he never knew he'd married. To the world, or at least the small, curated world of their Greenwich Village circle, Rosalind Reed was an artist's dream. She was the quiet, supportive wife of the meteoric Gavin Reed, a man whose star was rising so fast in the world of architectural design that it left a trail of stardust and envy. Rosie, as he called her, was his anchor. She was a freelance graphic designer, talented enough to be respected but not so successful as to overshadow him. She managed their beautiful brownstone with an effortless grace, hosted intimate dinners where Gavin could charm potential clients, and her gentle smile was the perfect accessory to his sharp, custom-tailored suits. Their love story was, by all accounts, perfect. They'd met at a small coffee shop in Soho 5 years ago. She was sketching in a notepad, and he'd accidentally spilled his latte near her table. A clumsy introduction he later admitted was a calculated move. He was captivated by her unassuming beauty and her genuine interest in his ambitions, not his family name, which held a respectable, if not spectacular, weight in New York real estate. For Rosalind, Gavin was a breath of fresh air. She had spent her life suffocated by the immense pressure of her own name. Quinn. Rosalind Quinn, the sole heiress to the Beaumont Group, a multi-generational global conglomerate with holdings in luxury hospitality, rare minerals, and cutting-edge technology. From birth, her life had been a meticulously planned trajectory of boarding schools, Ivy League education, and a future marriage to an appropriate suitor to merge dynasties. The men she met only saw a walking vault, a prize to be won. At 23, she had orchestrated her escape. With the secret help of Arthur Abernathy, her late grandfather's most trusted advisor, and the current steward of the Beaumont Trust, she had created Rosalind, a woman with a modest trust fund, a fabricated backstory of middle-class parents in Oregon, and a passion for art. She wanted to be loved for herself, not for the Beaumont name. She wanted to build a life, not inherit one. Meeting Gavin felt like a validation of that choice. He loved her, the quiet artist. He had no idea she could buy his entire family's real estate company with the interest from one of her smaller trust accounts. Their life was a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were coffee and shared newspapers. Days were spent in their respective creative pursuits. He in his sleek downtown office, she in her sun-drenched attic studio. Evenings were for reconnecting, for sharing wins and losses. Rosalind poured her soul into supporting him. When he was struggling with a concept for a new eco-luxury resort, she spent weeks sketching, researching sustainable materials, and developing a unique aesthetic philosophy for him. She created a comprehensive design brief, complete with logos, branding concepts, and architectural flow diagrams. "This is brilliant, Rosie," he had said, his eyes gleaming as he looked over her work. "Absolutely brilliant. You have a real gift." "It's all for you," she had whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. "When you win, I win." He took her concepts and presented them as his own. The project, dubbed the Ethelgard Oasis, won him a prestigious industry award and caught the eye of Ashford Capital, a ruthless venture capital firm known for catapulting startups into the stratosphere. Gavin was ecstatic. He was no longer just Gavin Reed, he was the visionary behind Ethelgard. Rosalind celebrated with him, her pride genuine, uncolored by any need for credit. His success was her success, their success. But success changed him. The intimate dinners became lavish parties. The quiet evenings were replaced by late-night calls and networking events she wasn't invited to. He started talking less about their future and more about his legacy. He bought a Patek Philippe watch she knew they couldn't afford, dismissing her concerns with a wave of his hand. You have to look the part, Rosie. Ashford Capital isn't investing in a small-timer. They're investing in a brand. I am the brand. A chill began to creep into the corners of her perfect life. The man she loved was becoming a stranger, polished and hard, like the marble he now favored in his designs. He was so focused on building his empire, he didn't notice the foundation of their life was beginning to crack. And Rosalind, who had given up an empire for this simple life, was starting to fear she had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The name Victoria Ashford entered their lives not with a bang, but as a recurring, elegant signature at the bottom of company-wide emails Gavin would leave open on his laptop. Victoria was Walter Ashford's daughter, the COO of Ashford Capital, and the gatekeeper to the funding Gavin so desperately craved to make the Ethelgard Oasis a global phenomenon. She's intense, Gavin admitted one night, loosening his tie. All business, sharp as a tack, but she gets my vision. She sees the potential. Rosalind, serving him a plate of pasta she'd made from scratch, felt a prickle of something she couldn't name. It wasn't jealousy, not yet. It was, irrelevance. Gavin used to dissect every meeting with her, value her perspective. Now he spoke of Victoria's insights with a reverence he once reserved for her own. The late nights became more frequent. Strategy sessions with Victoria, he'd text. Closing the deal. He'd come home smelling of expensive perfume, not hers, and whiskey, his eyes alight with an ambition that had burned away all traces of the gentle man she'd married. Rosalind tried to bridge the growing chasm. She planned a weekend getaway to a cabin in the Berkshires, a place where they had once spent days hiking and talking, disconnected from the city's hum. I can't, Rosie, he said, barely looking up from his phone. Victoria's flying in partners from Singapore. This is the final push. Just one day, Gavin. For us. He finally looked at her, and his expression was one of pity. It was a look that said, "You just don't get it. This is for us, don't you see? Once this deal is signed, we'll have everything we've ever dreamed of." But the dreams he was describing were no longer hers. He spoke of penthouses overlooking Central Park, summers in the Hamptons, a life of power and influence. Her dream had been the brownstone, the studio, the man who loved her for who she was. She was realizing with dawning horror that he had never known who she was at all. The true turning point came during the annual Architectural Guild Gala. It was the biggest night of the year, and Gavin, as the industry's new golden boy, was the guest of honor. Rosalind spent a week choosing the perfect dress, a simple, elegant navy silk gown that wouldn't upstage him. But when she came downstairs ready to go, he was already standing by the door, impatiently checking his watch. He looked her up and down, and a faint frown creased his brow. Is that what you're wearing? I thought it was, understated, she said, her confidence wavering. It's fine, he sighed, but his tone said the opposite. At the gala, he was a whirlwind of handshakes and air kisses. He introduced her briefly to a few people, but his attention was elsewhere. She found herself standing alone, a ghost at the feast, watching her husband across the ballroom. He was standing with a tall, impossibly chic woman in a severe blood-red gown. Her blonde hair was slicked back into a chignon, and she commanded attention without demanding it. It was Victoria Ashford. Rosalind watched as Gavin laughed, his head tilted towards Victoria's in a way that was both intimate and performative. He placed a hand on the small of her back to guide her through the crowd, a gesture of casual possession that he hadn't used with Rosalind in months. It was a small thing, a fleeting moment, but it screamed a truth that Rosalind had been desperately trying to ignore. She felt a hand on her arm and turned to see one of Gavin's junior associates, a kind young man named Ben. Mrs. Reed, can I get you a drink? You look a little pale. I'm fine, Ben, thank you. She managed a weak smile. He's really something, isn't he? Ben said, nodding towards Gavin. And Ms. Ashford. They're a powerhouse duo. They work day and night. Some of us in the office joke they're practically married to the project. The word married hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Rosalind watched them, the man she loved and the woman who held his future, in her perfectly manicured hands. The shadow she'd been sensing for months finally had a name and a face, And in that moment, she understood that she wasn't just losing her husband to his ambition, she was losing him to the woman who embodied it. The final blow came on a rainy Tuesday night. Gavin was supposedly in Chicago for a 24-hour trip to meet with a materials supplier. Rosalind, unable to sleep, was tidying up his office, a space that had increasingly become his fortress. She picked up the cashmere scarf he'd thrown over his chair, the one she'd bought him for his last birthday. As she folded it, his secondary phone, a sleek burner phone she'd never seen before, slipped out of the folds and clattered onto the hardwood floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew, with a primal certainty, that she should not pick it up. She knew that whatever was on that phone would change everything. But the not knowing was a poison that had been slowly killing her for months. Her hands shaking, she pressed the side button. The screen lit up. There was no passcode, and there it was. A string of messages from Victoria Ashford. Victoria, landing in 15. The suite at the Peninsula is booked. Can't wait to see you. Gavin, longest flight of my life. I've missed you. Victoria, did you handle things at home? Gavin, she doesn't suspect a thing. Thinks I'm in Chicago. She's so beautifully naive. It's almost a shame. The word naive struck her with the force of a physical slap. He saw her love, her trust, her sacrifice as naivety. Below those messages were photos. Gavin and Victoria on a yacht, her in a bikini, him with his arms wrapped around her. Gavin and Victoria at a black tie event in London she knew nothing about. Gavin and Victoria kissing deeply and passionately in what looked like the back of a limousine. A wave of nausea washed over her. She stumbled back, dropping the phone, and ran to the bathroom, her carefully constructed world collapsing into a million razor-sharp pieces. She collapsed onto the floor, the cold tile a shock to her system, the sound of her own ragged breaths echoing in the silent house. But the betrayal went deeper than infidelity. Driven by a cold, desperate need to know the full extent of the damage, she went back to his office. She turned on his computer. His password, ironically, was Rosie, turned 23. She had felt so loved when he'd said it. Now it felt like a sick joke. She went through his emails, his files, his financial records, and the true horror revealed itself. He hadn't just stolen her heart, he had pillaged their life. He had taken out a second mortgage on their brownstone, her brownstone bought with money from her modest trust, to fund his lavish lifestyle and to buy expensive gifts for Victoria. He had forged her signature on the loan documents. Then she found the folder. Ethelgard Final. She clicked it open. Inside were the pitch decks, the financial projections, the branding guidelines. And there on page after page were her sketches, her words, her ideas. Her entire creative concept, the one she had poured her heart into for him, was presented as his own singular vision. He had systematically stripped her of everything, leaving her with nothing but a mountain of debt and a name on a lease. He was due back the next afternoon. Rosalind didn't cry anymore. The pain had burned itself out, leaving behind an icy, terrifying calm. She packed one small bag, clothes, her laptop, and the burner phone. She walked through the brownstone one last time, touching the furniture they had picked out together, looking at the photos of a smiling couple who were now strangers. When Gavin walked through the door, looking tired but triumphant, he found her sitting in the living room, surrounded by an unnerving stillness. "Rosie, you're not going to believe the progress we made," he began, dropping his briefcase. "I know you weren't in Chicago," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. His smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" She tossed the burner phone onto the coffee table between them. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of him. He stared at it, the color draining from his face. For a moment, he looked genuinely panicked, but it passed, replaced by a cold, hard mask. "So you know," he said, shrugging, as if it were a minor inconvenience. "I was going to tell you." "Tell me what, Gavin? That you've been sleeping with Victoria Ashford? That you mortgaged our home behind my back? Or that your visionary Ethelgard project was stolen, piece by piece, from my sketchbooks?" He actually laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. "Stolen? Oh, Rosie, don't be so dramatic. You had some cute ideas. I turned them into a billion-dollar enterprise. You should be thanking me. I gave you everything, she whispered, the ice in her veins finally cracking. I believed in you. And that was your mistake, he said, his voice laced with a cruelty she had never heard before. He stood up, towering over her. You're a sweet girl, Rosie, but you're weak. You have no ambition, no killer instinct. You were holding me back. Victoria, she's my equal. We're building an empire. He gestured around the beautiful room. Look at this. This is all you are. A homemaker, a hobbyist. Without me, you are nothing. Nothing. That was the word that would echo in her mind for years. He believed it. He had made her believe it. The quiet, simple life she had chosen to find love had become the cage he'd used to trap her. She stood up, her back straight. You will regret saying that. I doubt it, he scoffed, already pulling out his own phone. Probably to text Victoria that the inconvenience had been dealt with. The locks will be changed tomorrow. Have your things out by then. Rosalind didn't say another word. She picked up her bag and walked out the door of the life she had built, leaving the man she had loved behind. As she stepped out into the rain, the city lights blurring through her tears, she was no longer Rosie Reed, the naive wife. She was Rosalind Quinn, and a Quinn never forgets a debt. The first phone call Rosalind made was from a sterile hotel room overlooking the Hudson River. She had been staring at the number in her contacts for an hour, the name a link to a life she had shed like a second skin. Arthur Abernathy. He answered on the first ring, his voice as calm and steady as it had been her entire life. Rosalind, I was wondering when you might call. There was no, I told you so. No recrimination, just a quiet, unwavering presence. That was all it took for her carefully constructed dam of composure to break. The story of the past 5 years of Gavin, of the love and the lies, poured out of her in a torrent of grief and rage. Arthur listened patiently, his silence a comforting balm. When she was finished, her voice raw, there was a long pause on the line. Then he said simply, I have the jet on standby at Teterboro. What is our destination? Geneva, she said without hesitation, the headquarters of the Beaumont Group's primary holding company, the heart of her empire. And your instructions for Mr. Reed? Arthur asked, a hint of steel in his voice. For now, nothing, Rosalind replied, a cold fire beginning to burn where her heart used to be. Let him have his victory. Let him and Miss Ashford build their castle on my stolen ground. The higher they climb, the harder they will fall. The next few days were a blur of calculated transformation. Arthur met her at the airport, not with a hug, but with a tablet displaying the current state of the Beaumont Group. In her absence, he had managed it flawlessly, but several key divisions were stagnating, coasting on old successes. They needed a leader. They needed her. As the Gulfstream G650 cut through the clouds, leaving New York and her old life behind, Rosie Reed was systematically erased. The first to go was her appearance. The long, soft brown hair was cut into a sharp, sophisticated bob. The comfortable, artistic wardrobe was replaced by a curated collection of bespoke power suits from Savile Row, razor-sharp stilettos, and a single understated piece of jewelry. A signet ring bearing the Beaumont crest, which she hadn't worn since she was a teenager. But the real transformation was internal. She spent the entire flight devouring market analyses, personnel files, and financial reports. The dormant parts of her brain, the parts trained in economics at Wharton and corporate law at Yale, roared back to life. She wasn't just the heiress anymore, she was the CEO. Her arrival in Geneva was unannounced. She walked into the gleaming Beaumont headquarters, a ghost from the past. The older board members who remembered her as a child stared in shock. The newer ones simply saw a woman who radiated an authority that was absolute. She convened an emergency board meeting. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. In a calm, precise, and utterly ruthless presentation, she laid out the company's weaknesses and her vision for the future. She identified failing projects to be cut, promising new ventures to be funded, and underperforming executives to be replaced. She spoke with the fluency and foresight of someone who hadn't just inherited a name, but had the intellect to command it. The Beaumont Group has been sleeping, she concluded, her eyes sweeping across the stunned faces in the boardroom. Today, it reawakens. The next 18 months were a relentless campaign. Rosalind worked with a ferocious, single-minded focus. She lived on planes, in boardrooms, and on conference calls spanning multiple time zones. She divested from underperforming assets with surgical precision and poured capital into emerging tech and sustainable energy, areas the old guard had been too timid to explore. She poached the brightest minds from rival corporations, including a brilliant but iconoclastic tech developer named Seth Cohen, who had been on the verge of signing a deal with Ashford Capital. She never spoke of Gavin. She never looked him up. She funneled all the pain of his betrayal into her work. Every successful negotiation was a quiet victory. Every new acquisition was a brick in the fortress she was building around her heart. Arthur Abernathy watched her transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. "You have your grandfather's mind," he told her one evening in her penthouse office overlooking Lake Geneva. "But do not let this quest for rectification consume the woman you are." "The woman I was is gone," Rosalind said, her eyes fixed on the city lights below. "She was weak and naive, and she was destroyed. The woman who remains is Rosalind Quinn, and she has a promise to keep." She had allowed Gavin Reed to believe he had destroyed her. She had let him build his world, secure in his arrogance. She had waited patiently while he and Victoria Ashford became the darlings of the financial world. Their Ethelgard Oasis project, lauded on the covers of Forbes and Fortune, she had waited for them to be at the absolute pinnacle of their success. Now she was ready to return to New York, not as the victim, but as the reckoning. The invitation arrived on Gavin Reed's desk like a royal decree. It was for the annual Metropolis Modern Benefit, the most exclusive event in New York's philanthropic and business calendar. This year, however, it was being co-chaired and principally sponsored by a name that had been largely dormant for years: the Beaumont Group. The buzz in the financial world was electric. The reclusive European conglomerate was making a major push into the American market, and its mysterious, newly active CEO was set to make their first public appearance. For Gavin and Victoria, this was the ultimate networking opportunity. Their first Ethelgard Oasis resort in Costa Rica was a resounding success, and they were in the final stages of securing a multi-billion-dollar credit line for global expansion. A strategic alliance with a titan like Beaumont could solidify their empire for decades. "We have to be there. We need to get a meeting with this CEO," Victoria stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. She was dressed in a sharp, minimalist dress, looking every inch the corporate empress. "I've already got my team trying to find out who it is," Gavin said, leaning back in his chair in their opulent office overlooking Manhattan. "No one seems to know anything. They say the name is Quinn, but the family has been out of the spotlight for a generation." He felt a faint, phantom echo at the name, but dismissed it. It was a common enough name. The night of the gala was a spectacle of wealth and power. Flashbulbs popped, diamonds glittered, and the air buzzed with 1,000 clandestine deals being brokered over champagne. Gavin and Victoria made a grand entrance, the undisputed power couple of the moment. He was confident, charming, and utterly in control of his world. The Beaumont Group's presence was palpable. Their logo, a stylized B, was subtly but impressively displayed. The decor was a masterclass in understated elegance and immense wealth. But the CEO was nowhere to be seen. As the main presentation began, the lights dimmed. The current chairman of the Metropolis Modern Museum took the stage. "And now," he boomed, his voice resonating through the grand ballroom, "it is my profound honor to introduce the visionary who has made this evening possible, a leader who is poised to reshape the very skyline of this city. Please welcome the chairwoman and CEO of the Beaumont Group, Ms. Rosalind Quinn." A single spotlight hit the entrance. Time seemed to slow down for Gavin. The name, Rosalind Quinn, hit him like a physical blow. No, it couldn't be. And then she walked in. It was her, but it wasn't. The soft, gentle Rosie he had discarded was gone. In her place was a woman forged in fire. Her dark hair was styled in a way that was both severe and impossibly glamorous. She wore a custom-made gown of midnight blue silk that clung to her form, its simplicity making the diamond necklace at her throat seem like a captured constellation. Her face was the same, but her eyes were different. They were the eyes of a predator, calm, intelligent, and utterly devoid of the love that had once looked at him. A collective gasp went through the room. People who knew Gavin and his simple ex-wife looked from her to him, the scandalous story writing itself in their expressions. Victoria stiffened beside him, her hand gripping his arm like a vice. "Gavin," she hissed, "what is the meaning of this?" Gavin couldn't speak. His mouth was dry, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. It was like seeing a ghost, but this ghost was more vibrant and alive than anyone in the room. This ghost owned the room. Rosalind glided to the stage, her composure absolute. She took the microphone, and a hush fell over the crowd. "Thank you for that warm welcome," she began, her voice smooth and confident, with a faint, unplaceable European inflection it had never had before. "The Beaumont Group believes in the future. We believe in innovation, in strength, and in integrity." She paused, and her eyes, cold and brilliant, swept the room until they landed directly on Gavin. She held his gaze for a heartbeat, a silent acknowledgement of the war she had just declared. "We also believe," she continued, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips, "that you should never, ever underestimate the person you're sitting next to. They might just surprise you." The crowd applauded politely, missing the targeted venom in her words. But Gavin heard it. He felt it in his bones. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a declaration. The mousy, artistic wife he had thrown away had returned as a queen. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his very soul, that she had come back to burn his kingdom to the ground. Gavin and Victoria stumbled out of the gala in a state of shock, the flash bulbs of the paparazzi feeling like an assault. The drive back to their penthouse was silent and suffocating. The power dynamic between them, once so clear, had been irrevocably shattered. "Her name is Rosalind Quinn," Victoria finally seethed, turning to him the moment the apartment door closed. "The heiress to the Beaumont Group? That's your quiet little artist from Oregon?" "I didn't know," Gavin stammered, running a hand through his hair. "I swear, Victoria. She fabricated everything. She wanted a simple life. And you believed her?" Victoria laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You, who prides himself on reading people, married the most powerful heiress on the continent and never once suspected? You are a fool, Gavin." The respect she once had for him had curdled into contempt. His visionary status was now tainted by the fact that he had been blind to the gold mine, sitting in his own home. The next morning, the war began. It was not a frontal assault, but a campaign of 1,000 cuts, executed with the precision of a master strategist. Gavin and Victoria's global expansion plan hinged on acquiring 3 key companies: a sustainable materials firm in Germany, a construction logistics company in Singapore, and a small but innovative smart home technology firm in Silicon Valley. Within a week, all 3 were acquired in a series of swift, hostile takeovers. The buyer, in each case, was a newly created, anonymous subsidiary. It took Gavin's frantic team of lawyers 2 weeks to trace the ownership. Every road led back to the Beaumont Group. Rosalind had boxed them in. She now owned their entire supply chain. Panicked, Gavin tried to open a new line of credit to finance a workaround, only to find the bank suddenly hesitant. Their primary lender, a Swiss bank they had courted for months, politely informed them that their risk profile had changed. Gavin later found out that the Beaumont Group had become the bank's single largest private client the week before. Then came the talent drain. Key engineers from Gavin's firm, the ones who had turned his, Rosalind's, ideas into reality, began to resign. They were all heading to a new, incredibly well-funded R&D lab. The lab was called Phoenix, and it was the brainchild of Seth Cohen, the tech genius Rosalind had poached from under Victoria's nose. Its sole purpose was to innovate beyond the Ethelgard concept, making it obsolete before it was even fully built. The most personal blow came in the form of a lawsuit for intellectual property theft. Rosalind wasn't suing him personally. Instead, a young, unknown artist filed a claim against Gavin's firm, providing an exhaustive portfolio of designs and conceptual documents for an eco-resort that were identical to the Ethelgard plans. The documents were dated 2 years before Gavin had ever pitched the idea to Ashford Capital. The artist claimed the portfolio had been stolen. Gavin knew instantly. It was Rosalind's work, her original sketchbooks and digital files, now in the hands of a proxy. She wasn't just coming after his business. She was systematically dismantling the very myth of his genius. She was reclaiming her identity, her ideas, and her power, piece by painful piece. Reporters began circling. The story was too juicy to ignore. Billionaire heiress's secret life and the ex-husband who allegedly stole her ideas. Gavin Reed, the self-made visionary, was being recast as a con man and a thief. His brand, the one he had prized above all else, was turning toxic. Victoria, ever the pragmatist, began to distance herself. Her father, Walter Ashford, summoned them both to his intimidating office. "This is a mess, Reed," the old man grunted, his eyes like chips of ice. "My daughter's name and my firm's capital are tied to a man who is either a liar or an incompetent fool. I am pulling our funding. Ashford Capital is divesting from the Ethelgard project, effective immediately." "You can't," Gavin pleaded. "We're too far in." "I'm cutting my losses," Ashford said coldly. He turned to his daughter. "Victoria, you are done with him. This partnership is dissolved." Victoria didn't even look at Gavin. She simply nodded at her father. "Yes, father." She had made her choice. She was an Ashford first, and Gavin's, she was realizing, were replaceable. Gavin was left standing alone, his empire crumbling around him. He had lost his funding, his supply chain, his key talent, and now, the woman for whom he had thrown everything away. He was hemorrhaging money, his reputation in tatters. He had underestimated Rosie. He had called her weak, naive, nothing. He now saw that her quietness had not been weakness, but observation. Her simplicity had not been ignorance, but a disguise. He had been playing checkers while she was mastering a game of three-dimensional chess he never even knew existed. She wasn't just trying to ruin him. She was disassembling his life with the same meticulous care with which she had once helped him build it. Desperate and cornered, Gavin did the one thing he had left to do. He went to see her. He bypassed security at the Beaumont Tower by using his old contacts, his remaining charm wearing thin. He found himself standing outside the door of her penthouse apartment, a place so high above the city it felt like it was in another atmosphere. The door was opened not by a butler but by Rosalind herself. She was dressed in simple black silk trousers and a cashmere sweater, looking relaxed and utterly in control. She held a glass of wine in her hand. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a cool, weary expectation. "Gavin," she said, her voice neutral, "I was wondering when you'd run out of other options." She didn't invite him in, but simply turned and walked back into the vast, minimalist living room. The entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a breathtaking panorama of the city, his city, which was no longer his. He followed her in, the door clicking shut behind him. "Rosalind, Rosie, we need to talk," he began, his voice strained. "There is nothing to talk about," she said, taking a sip of her wine, her back to him as she looked out at the lights. "You are being sued for intellectual property theft. Your lenders have abandoned you. Your primary business partner has dissolved your relationship. These are all facts. What is there to discuss?" "This is a vendetta," he burst out, his desperation making him angry. "You're trying to destroy me." She turned around slowly, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It was something colder. "Destroy you? No, Gavin. I am merely correcting a market imbalance. You took something that didn't belong to you, and the market is now adjusting the price. You built a life on a lie, and now you're facing a margin call." He took a step closer, trying to summon the old intimacy they once shared. "Rosie, I know I hurt you. I was a fool. I was dazzled by the money, by Victoria. But what we had was real. The man you fell in love with is still here." Rosalind let out a soft, mirthless laugh. "The man I fell in love with? He was a charming, ambitious artist who respected my mind and cherished my heart. That man ceased to exist a long time ago. Or perhaps," she added, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "he never existed at all. Perhaps he was just a role you were playing to get what you wanted." He saw it was hopeless. The appeal to emotion, to their shared past, was hitting a wall of solid ice. He switched tactics. "Fine," he snarled, his true nature emerging from beneath the crumbling facade of contrition. "You want to play rough? I'll drag your name through the mud. I will tell everyone how you lied to me for years, how you manipulated me, How this whole marriage was some sick game for a bored little rich girl. She didn't flinch. Instead, she walked over to a sleek console table and picked up a tablet. She tapped the screen a few times and turned it to face him. It was a video file. The security footage from their old brownstone's living room on the night she left. The hidden camera she'd installed weeks before when her suspicions first started. His voice filled the silent penthouse, ugly and clear. "You're weak. You have no ambition. Without me, you are nothing." The camera showed him standing over her, arrogant and cruel. It showed her, looking small and broken, and it showed him scoffing as she walked out. "The world loves a story, Gavin," Rosalind said, setting the tablet down. "And you're right, they'd be interested in the story of the billionaire who went undercover. But I think they'll be far more interested in the story of the man who emotionally abused his wife and stole her work, only to discard her when he thought he had no more use for her. The media will call it the Ballad of Gavin Reed, a study in arrogance. I, on the other hand, am a woman who was deceived, who fought her way back, and who is reclaiming what is hers. Who do you think they'll root for?" "Checkmate." He stared at her, finally understanding the sheer depth of his miscalculation. He hadn't just betrayed a woman, he had betrayed a queen, and she had outmaneuvered him at every single turn. He had no moves left. "What do you want?" he finally whispered, his voice broken. "Weckman, what will it take to make this stop?" "I want you to sign a public confession," she stated, her voice devoid of any triumph. "You will admit to taking my designs. You will issue a formal apology. You will then sign over your remaining company assets to a holding firm of my choice to settle the damages. In exchange, the IP lawsuit will be dropped, and this video will never see the light of day." "That will ruin me," he breathed. "You were already ruined, Gavin," she replied, turning back to the window. "You ruined yourself the moment you decided that integrity was a fair price to pay for ambition. This is just the paperwork." He stood there for a long time, the silence stretching between them, thick with the ghosts of what they once were. He saw now that he hadn't just lost his company or his fortune. He had lost his soul, and he had handed the woman he'd called nothing the power to write his epitaph. Defeated, he finally gave the only answer he could. "Send me the documents." The downfall of Gavin Reed was swift and brutal. His public confession sent shockwaves through the industry. The media, just as Rosalind predicted, portrayed him as the ultimate villain and her as the wronged heroine. A phoenix risen from the ashes. Stripped of his company, his reputation, and his partnerships, he faded into obscurity. A cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Victoria Ashford, insulated by her family's wealth, simply moved on, her brief association with Gavin a footnote in her relentless climb. Rosalind watched it all from a distance, feeling not a sense of victory, but a quiet, somber closure. The fire of her revenge had burned itself out, and in its place was a vast, open space. She had reclaimed her past, but now she had to build her future. She did not retreat back to Geneva. She stayed in New York, the city of her heartbreak and her rebirth. The Beaumont Group's American headquarters now occupied the top 10 floors of the city's newest, most architecturally significant skyscraper. But her focus shifted. The holding company that had absorbed Gavin's failed firm was repurposed. Rosalind renamed it the Ethelgard Foundation. Using the shell of the company built on her stolen dreams, she created a new legacy. The foundation's mission was to provide funding, legal support, and mentorship to women in creative and business fields who had been exploited or had their work stolen by powerful partners. The first person she funded was the young artist who had acted as her proxy in the lawsuit, giving her the capital to start her own firm. Rosalind found a new kind of fulfillment, not in hostile takeovers, but in strategic cultivation. Working alongside Seth Cohen, she poured Beaumont resources into her Phoenix R&D lab, which quickly became a global leader in sustainable technology and ethical design, creating the kind of world-changing innovations she and Gavin had once talked about in their Greenwich Village brownstone. She was building everything he had ever wanted, but she was doing it with the integrity he had lacked. One afternoon, Arthur Abernathy visited her in her office, which, unlike Gavin's, was open, filled with light, and decorated with the works of up-and-coming female artists. "Your grandfather would be immensely proud, Rosalind," he said, looking at the city below. You've not only secured the family legacy, you have redefined it. Rosalind looked out at the sprawling metropolis, no longer seeing the ghosts of her past, but the blueprints of her future. I spent years hiding from my name, she said thoughtfully, and then I spent years using it as a weapon. I think I'm finally ready to just use it to build. She was no longer Rosalind Quinn, the hidden heiress, nor was she Rosie Reed, the broken wife. She was simply Rosalind, an architect of her own life, a woman who had walked through the fire of betrayal and emerged not hardened but forged. She had learned that true power wasn't about hiding who you are or seeking revenge for what was taken. It was about standing in the full light of your own strength and using it to build a world where no woman would ever again be told that she is nothing. Her greatest project was just beginning. 3 years had passed. The name Gavin Reed was now little more than a ghost in the annals of New York business, a footnote in a story that had become Rosalind Quinn's modern legend. The Ethelgard Foundation, once the symbol of his downfall, was now a celebrated institution, a beacon of hope for creators and entrepreneurs. Tonight was the Foundation's inaugural summit, a glittering event held not in a stuffy ballroom, but in a beautifully repurposed warehouse in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, a space that championed innovation over old-world opulence. The air buzzed with energy, filled with the very people Rosalind had set out to empower. She wasn't on stage or at the head table. Instead, she stood at the back of the crowd, watching a young software developer named Maya Chen command the stage. Maya, one of the Foundation's first grantees, had developed a revolutionary AI-driven design software. Her ex-partner had tried to patent it under his name and push her out of the company she co-founded. The Foundation had provided the legal muscle and seed funding for her to fight back and relaunch on her own. "They tell you to be the silent partner," Maya said, her voice ringing with passion. "The quiet support. They count on you not knowing your own worth. The Ethelgard Foundation didn't just give me a check. It gave me a voice. It reminded me that the idea, the true vision, is the most valuable asset, and it is ours." The crowd erupted in applause. Rosalind felt a quiet, profound sense of rightness settle over her. This was the true endgame. It was never about the ruin of one man. It was about the cultivation of hundreds of women like Maya. A familiar presence appeared at her side. "Quite a legacy you're building, Quinn," Seth Cohen said softly, handing her a glass of champagne. His professional partnership with Rosalind had blossomed into a deep, trusting friendship, the bedrock of her new life. "We're building," she corrected him with a small smile. "Phoenix Labs Tech is running half the startups in this room. I handle the code. You handle the world changing," he quipped. He looked at her, his expression turning more serious. "You seem peaceful." "I am," she admitted. The burning need for retribution had long since cooled, leaving behind the clear, calm waters of purpose. "I finally feel like I'm living in a story I'm writing myself, not one that was written for me or because of someone else." "About that," Seth said, leaning against a steel pillar. "The new bioluminescence project in Puerto Rico is finally stable. The team can handle it for a few weeks. I was thinking, we've never taken a real vacation. Not a working trip, just time off, somewhere with no cell service." His suggestion was simple, devoid of pressure, yet it hung in the air between them, full of unspoken potential. A few years ago, the idea of being that vulnerable, of stepping away and trusting someone else, would have been unthinkable. Now she met his gaze and found not a risk, but a possibility, an opening. "I think," she said slowly, "that sounds like a perfect next chapter." Later, as the event wound down, Rosalind stepped outside into the cool night air, waiting for her car. A light rain was beginning to fall, making the city lights across the river shimmer. Across the street, huddled under the flimsy awning of a closed bodega, a man was trying to light a cigarette, his hands trembling in the damp cold. His suit was ill-fitting, his shoulders slumped with the permanent weight of defeat. When he looked up, his eyes met hers across the rain-slicked street. It was Gavin. He looked hollowed out, a pale imitation of the brilliant, arrogant man who had once owned this city. The recognition in his eyes was instant, followed by a wave of raw, pathetic shame. He flinched, dropping his cigarette, and quickly turned away, hiding his face in the shadows as if her gaze were a physical blow. Rosalind stood perfectly still. There was no anger, no surge of triumph. The powerful, all-consuming emotions he once provoked had vanished. She felt only a faint, detached pity for the shell of a man he had become. He was a ghost from a different lifetime, a character from a book she had long since finished reading. Her car pulled up, the warm light of the interior spilling onto the wet pavement. She didn't look his way again. She simply got in, the door closing with a soft, definitive click. As the car moved forward, she looked ahead, through the rain-streaked windshield, at the endless horizon of city lights and the promise of a future built not on the ashes of the past, but on the solid ground of her own making. Rosalind Quinn's story is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds can often become the source of our greatest strength. She was stripped of her love, her trust, and her identity, betrayed by the one person she let into her carefully guarded world. But she refused to remain a victim. Instead of just seeking revenge, she sought justice and redefined her own legacy, turning the weapons formed against her into tools to build a better future for others. Her journey teaches us that our true value is never determined by someone else's perception, and that the most formidable empires are the ones we build within ourselves after the old world has burned away. If you were moved by Rosalind's incredible story of resilience and empowerment, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more unforgettable stories of betrayal, triumph, and the indomitable human spirit. What part of Rosalind's comeback resonated most with you? Let us know in the comments below.